going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here to talk to you about a book, Voyage of the Starwolf, written by David Gerold. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If that name sounds familiar to you, you might be a hardcore Trekkie, because this man wrote the screenplay for the Star Trek original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. He was in college when he wrote that script, and I think he may have done some more work on Star Trek. His bio page in this book only specifically mentions Trouble with Tribbles, but he did work on other TV shows. And his work on Star Trek must have stuck with him because I think the thing he is most well known for is the world that is portrayed in this book. My understanding is he wrote a short story that was very similar to what is in this book, and then later he expanded the events of that story and created this novel. And then it also had 2 sequels, which I have not read. And then about 10-ish years ago, he did a Kickstarter to try and turn this book into a TV series. And that was actually where I first heard of the world of the Starwolf. And at that time, I found out this guy had worked on Star Trek the original series, and then he was hyping this up as basically Star Trek but darker and grittier. And the Kickstarter did not succeed, and so for years I never did know what was in store for the world of the Starwolf. And at the time, I remember backing that Kickstarter. I didn't know that originally it was a book that he had written. And then a year or two ago, probably pre-pandemic, I found this in a used bookstore and bought it, and I read it, and I enjoy this book, but I don't think that it is very well written. So basically, this book is 251 pages long, but the actual story of this book begins right around page 100. Everything here is all backstory, but we are wasting our time with it before the actual meat of the book starts around page 100. So basically, we have these genetically engineered superhumans called Morthans. And when we finally meet a Morthan, they are actually big, scary cat people. But they were created by humans, and they were descended from humans. I don't know how many generations it took for the genetically engineered superhumans to become cat people. But I think that, sorry, I'm just thinking about if I should do the David Bowie thing again. But anyway, these Morthans, they are at war with humanity. And it's basically kind of a Star Trek situation. You have the Alliance, that is a group of starships, all with a chain of command very similar to Starfleet. And then the Morthans, they attack this caravan of spaceships that is kind of central to the economic system of space. They, I guess, carry supplies to and fro from different planets, and the Morthans attack this caravan, and one specific ship, it is like the L1187, I think. Ships do not get a name until they have bloodied their swords, we are told. And this particular ship is nearly paralyzed. They lose most of their functions, and then we spend a good 20 or 30 pages watching the survivors of this attack. They don't have gravity. They have lost like the ability to produce oxygen, so they have to try and finagle a way to how are we going to breathe. So they set up this plant system so that well, this will help a little bit until we can figure something out. And it's a lot of interesting ideas. Whenever you watch Star Trek, very rarely do you see anything like this play out. Usually, they've got a fantastic ship that works great, and even after they're in a fight with an enemy ship, they're not losing air, or we don't have gravity. We're having to kind of crawl through the ship because we don't even have basic stuff that a normal ship would have. But we are following this guy who is the executive officer, the second in command of the ship, and the captain in this attack. basically went unconscious, and then later he dies off screen. And so the executive officer is having to kind of take command of the ship and make all of these tough choices. And in the beginning of the book, the captain of the ship tells the executive officer, Corey is his name, it's Korrie. He tells Corey, never ever lie to your crew. That is the first thing that you need to know about being a captain. And so throughout this book, we see Corey struggle with the idea that yes, sometimes you do have to lie to your crew, mostly to keep up morale. Whenever everything looks like it's falling apart, sometimes you have to lie to them and say this one thing happened to make everyone feel better. And that is kind of a running theme throughout the book. And then finally, around 90 or so pages into the book, they make it back to the main headquarters of the Alliance, where we find out that the Admiralty is blaming this particular ship for the attack on the caravan. They are saying this ship somehow led the Morthans to the caravan. And so if the captain comes out of his coma, he's going to be court-martialed. And this very much reminds me of Star Trek again. Whenever you see, like, in a Star Trek movie where someone says, we have to crash the Enterprise in order to defeat the Borg, or in order to defeat Malcolm McDowell, or whatever, I feel like they crashed the Enterprise a couple of times, and it always is played as this was the right choice to make in the moment, but we never do see Captain Picard being yelled at by an admiral who says, are you an idiot? What are you thinking? You just crashed a ship. And in this story, they're in the middle of a war, and they did something. There's several choices that Corey makes whenever he was basically in command of the ship, that in the moment, those were the right choices to make. But then he gets back and he's being yelled at for doing all this stuff incorrectly. And so there's a lot of interesting ideas here. But like I said, the actual story doesn't start until about page 100. Everything leading up to about that point in the book could have been given to us in dialogue and exposition through the book narrating what's going on. We did not need the first 100 pages of this 251-page book. There's a lot of stuff in this book. It almost feels like David Gerald is kind of just making it up as he goes along. When Corey is getting chewed out by the Admiral, he says, well, since my career is dead anyway, since I was the one making all these choices and I'm in trouble for it, I am going to resign. And then the Admiral says, no, you can't do that. We need warm bodies. You can't leave. He says, okay, but you're telling me to my face that I can't be a captain, so I don't want to be here. And he's kind of in between a rock and a hard place. They won't let him leave, but also they refuse to promote him, and they say, like, nobody will willingly join this ship. Once we get it fixed up, nobody is willingly going to become part of this crew. You guys are kind of a pariah because everyone knows you guys are responsible for leading the Morthans to the caravan. And then he finds out, he says, well, at one point he says, okay, if you're not going to let me leave the Alliance, then at least let me go back to working in a factory that builds ships. That's what I used to do before I was an executive officer. And then I'll be able to visit my family. And she says, oh, your family died. After the attack on the caravan, this one planet over here that your family lived on, it was completely wiped out. Everyone on that planet died. And this is supposed to be a really big wow moment, a jaw-dropping, like, your soul is crushed when something so devastating happens to your main character, except we didn't know that he had a family before this moment. At no point in the previous 100 pages did he mention that he had a family. This is the first we're hearing about him, and they died. And it's sad whenever he's looking at the holograms of his family, and it's kind of like keeping a voicemail on your phone of someone who died. It's sad, sure, but it could have been a lot more emotionally effective if we knew about this before. The best way that I can imagine describing this book is if you've ever seen the pilot episode of Firefly. We open with the Battle of Serenity, and we get to meet Mal Reynolds and Zoe. I can't remember what her name was at the time. She wasn't married to Wash. But this is the last battle of the big war between everyone in that galaxy. And then we get to see the Browncoats, they lose the war. And then we cut forward however many years later, maybe 7 years, I don't know. And then the actual story is Mal running a pirate ship, and then then putting together his crew over the course of the pilot episode. This book is like if you spent 45 minutes on the Battle of Serenity and Mao as a soldier, and then out of nowhere you do a time jump to Mao as a pirate, and you do the events of Firefly. That is not where the story is. Your story is not the backstory. Your backstory can be very interesting. Sometimes I read books and I'm more fascinated by the backstory that we're not actually seeing than the actual story that we are experiencing. But this book does not seem to know where its actual story is. So it hems and haws for 100 pages with stuff that is interesting. Whenever you watch a lot of sci-fi stuff, it's interesting seeing something that kind of deconstructs a little bit of that in ways that I've never seen before. Maybe other authors have, but I've never seen anything that tackles some of the stuff that this book tackles in this way. But the actual story really should have begun with Corey getting on the ship and meeting the new captain, this guy who is just a complete hard butt, who's not going to tolerate any nonsense. And then you mention in dialogue, 6 months ago, you led this ship after an attack on the caravan, and you kind of let discipline go out the window, and I'm not going to let you do that again. And then you find out about everything that we read in the first 100 pages of this book through dialogue. And then occasionally Corey can be thinking about something that happened, and he thinks about how much he hates Morthans, and now he's having to work with a Morthan on this ship, and he hates this guy because his family was killed by Morthans. And a lot of this book, I think the pacing would have worked a lot better if we took the last 150 pages of this book and either A, stretched it out and added a little bit more to that portion of the book, or this could have just been a 151-page book. But it's 251 pages, and the first 100 pages is basically world building. We do get a little bit of conflict in that first 100 pages. At one point, the ship that would eventually, this is kind of a spoiler, but since it's in the title, the ship that would eventually be known as the Starwolf, it comes in contact with a Morthan ship. And then nothing happens. And that kind of comes into play later in the book, but I think you very easily could take a big knife and just cut the first 100 pages of this book out and then read the last 150 pages, and basically you would still have a complete story. It's really puzzling to me that this is written by somebody who, at the time this was published, had been doing published professional screenwriting for like 25 years by this point. It's really puzzling to me that he had so much experience under his belt and then he put something like this out. This really does feel like a first draft that an editor should have said, no, you're going to need to fix this. You've got some good ideas here, there's a kernel of a good story here, but we need to kind of polish it a little bit before we publish this. But this feels like maybe an editor said, yeah, this looks good, and just threw it out there, or maybe he didn't have an editor. I have no idea. But this was an interesting experience to me. Like I said, there are 2 sequels to this book. I may or may not look for those. If I found them cheap, I would probably buy them, but I'm not going to seek them out. We'll say that. I got this one pretty cheap, and I enjoyed it for what I paid for it, but if I saw that the sequel was going online for $10, I wouldn't pay that for a sequel. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Voyage of the Starwolf. I hope you guys liked this video, and I will be back in the future with another video. In the meantime, have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.